So later on, I'm going to need you to bear with me because we're going to try to attempt to do something that's fairly intimate in a room this size. That's going to be fun. We're going to see how that goes, okay? So what I want to do, I want to start out, I've been, I said earlier that once you start studying this stuff, you start to see it everywhere. And you see indicators of things everywhere. And even when you're reading things that have nothing to do with moral injury, you go, oh man. And so I've been reading this book, The Day After, and it's about why America wins the war but loses the peace. And I thought, oh, I ought to pick that one up. And mostly it's about planning and strategic and a whole bunch of other things that a lot of our officer corps talk about on a regular basis. But there's a couple of things that stood out to me. So this author says, we generally do not spend enough time thinking about the end game of war. We have a fundamental ambivalence which characterizes our approach to post-war situations and helps to create bad outcomes. As one senior military official told me bluntly in an interview, post-war planning is Annex Z of the war plan, and there's nothing in it. And I have been, I felt like the prophet screaming into the wind for 10 years, saying that I am not sure what our post-war plan is for our human beings, especially in a soft environment where we have people who are defined, their identity is drawn for the fact that I'm getting on a rotator next month to go do things on behalf of our nation that I'm really, really good at and that the country has invested a lot of money in me to do. And now, one day, that dries up. So anecdotally, I have a buddy who's an Army chaplain. And so after they were deploying real hot and heavy in like 2008, 2009, and it was basically in a rotation where they would spend 1 year at war and 1 year at home. And they were doing this over and over and over again. And so after the drawdown occurred in Iraq, what happened was all of a sudden, they passed 12 months at home. And they got to month 13, and month 14, and month 15, and domestic violence went off the chart. And alcohol incidences went off the chart, and divorces went off the chart. And everybody's screaming, chaplain, what is going on? We had built these human beings who could tolerate each other for 12 months and never longer. And now we're forcing them to do that again, and we gave them no training on how to transition from being people of war to being people of peace. And there is this intrinsic ideology that, well, you'll just come home, and it'll be flash frozen. I used to always think about it this way, right? So I've said for many years that you're deployed for 3 days. The day you get there, Groundhog's Day, and the day you get back. And in my mindset, when I leave for a deployment, that's it. I feel as if the world should be exactly the same way when I return as it was when I left. But sure enough, you come home and your favorite restaurant isn't there anymore. And you come home and your kids are a little bit older and you've missed a birthday. And oh, by the way, my wife does not need me to function with our children. She runs a tight ship. And this guy shows up and wants to go to Froyo at 10:30 p.m. because, I'm a fun dad. And that just is so disruptive. And we have this procedure that we have to run through on a regular basis to figure out how to reintegrate. There is some research that has been done. I do not, we'll take this anecdotally for now, but the idea is it's something like 18 months for you to reintegrate back into your home after you've left for an extended period of time. Please go find me many people in our organization who have been at home for 18 months. Because if it wasn't deployment, it was upgrade training. If it wasn't upgrade training, it was a school, a school that they had to go to. It was a PCS where they're remote for a year or whatever else. So you go find me a bunch of people on this base who have been around and steady for 18 months. That's a tough slog. And so we have to invest in the same way that we invest in getting people ready to go to war. We have to invest in getting people ready to be home for war is something that I've argued for many, many years. So when I went and did my doctoral work, what I wanted to do was I wanted to develop a framework of sorts that we could use as professionals to help people reintegrate back on the homes from home station. And so here's what some of the things that were really important to me as I was developing this framework. Number one, I needed it to be spiritually robust. So in addition to just being a chaplain, and that's part of who I am, as I hope we convinced you earlier this morning, if we don't address people's spiritual issues, no matter what those look like, if we don't do that in concert with whatever else we're doing, we have the opportunity to really miss a key and important part of what's going on. And I don't think anyone who goes off to war returns with the same soul that they left with. I just don't think that that's possible. You have seen things that that other people have not seen. You have done things that other people have not done in places where other people will never go. And if we have someone who goes and does those things and does not change a single bit afterwards, like, I'm worried for that person in their personal growth. There's so much to do and learn while you're deployed. And what I always encourage our troops to do while we're out there is to go read that book and go to the gym and go do all of those things so that you're learning and growing while you're here, rather than that flash frozen idea of where, no, I'm just going to go do the thing, and then when I come home, I'll pick back up with life. It does not work that way, and y'all all know that. The second goal for this framework was that it needed to be research informed, right? So it wasn't just what chaplains or pastors think about how people should reintegrate, but I also needed to pull all the different strings from sociologists and from psychologists and from folks that have been doing this work in different formats in different places. And so I wanted to grab all of those best practices around and see if I could roll them into something that was ultimately has to be practical and easy to use, and a military concept, and something that, no kidding, I might be able to give to one of my troops and say, hey man, here's how you're going to want to work through this stuff on your way home, so that senior sergeant might be able to go and do this with his own people, or that I can empower y'all to do this, or I can empower other chaplains to do this in a way that makes sense in our context and is also simple enough that you can remember it. And even when you're working in like a counseling type situation, you can go, okay, we need to move around the model here a little bit and see if we can help this person find some healing. All right, so here is what I ended up with. This is what I call the ready to return model. And so we start up in the top right-hand corner, which is reframe. And the idea here is you want to consider your story from, we're going to start over in the left-hand corner with re-examine. I'm on the wrong side. So you want to talk about your deployment with trusted friends. Then we move to reframe, which is to consider your story from different angles. Then we go to ritual, which is to explore deepening meaning and commemorate. And then reconnect, which is to purposefully engage in your community. And we're going to go through each of these one by one. And you'll notice it's a circle. You'll notice that all of these things lead into the other, and for the sake of models, which all break down, it's not as if people neatly go from one to the other to the other to the other, and it's not as if people don't get on the train, off the train, back on the train, off the train, and skip from re-examine to ritual and reconnect up to reframe, and back and forth they go. But what we're looking to do, a lot of times when we find people, especially who have come to our office and are in a moment of crisis, they are spiraling down. And what I'm looking to do is find some sort of spiral upwards, right? And so as we use these things over and over again, working their way through moral injury, the goal is for them to be, to get them pointed in the right direction as they leave my office, even though often when they come into my office, they're spiraling down at quite a fast rate. All right, so let's take a look at the individual components here. First off is re-examining, and you'll notice all my stuff is deployment-related language. That does not mean that it is only effective for deployment, but this is deployment is a real easy place to roll this out, and it's where I did my original research. So you'll see deployment over and over again, but in the case that Chaplain Stewart made earlier, I think just military life in general has a lot of these moral injury components, and so all of this stuff, in my opinion, is exactly as valid outside of the deployment environment as it is inside of the deployment environment, but I just think it helps us frame it a bit. So it's talk about your deployment with trusted friends. Okay, so a couple of the concepts that I pulled from the greater world of literature as I was trying to figure out how to develop these things that keep showing up over and over again in good models was this concept of storytelling. a lot of times what I see happen is people have thoughts and feelings and emotions and all kinds of things just rolling, just moving around in their head at 100 miles an hour. And they are tormented by that. And they just don't know what to do with it. But as soon as they open their mouth with another human being and begin to tell that story, they begin to place some framework around it, some boundaries around it. They begin to form this narrative around what did and did not happen. And I've talked to investigators before, and they tell me that if you sit with someone whose story is locked tight when they first tell it to you, that you probably you should do some digging there. What you really want in terms of somebody honestly wrestling with what the truth is for them to jump back and forth in the narrative and go, oh, no, before that happened, this happened. Okay, so we did this, and I forgot to tell you about blah, blah, and you go back and forth. And what you're helping them do is create this cohesive narrative so that they actually have some framework moving around inside of the brain, and they have sorted and categorized and figured out the first way that they're going to tell this story. Now, over the course of time, I think we all know our stories, they change, right? They modify. We add details. We subtract details. We put it into some cohesive narrative. And so it's this organizing, right? We are taking chaos, absolute chaos that is rolling around into our brain, and we are working it into clarity. And more importantly, we're working it into meaning making. And we're trying to figure out what role we play as a character in that story. And then all of the best psychological interventions in terms of PTSD, and because these things overlap so frequently, that's where a lot of my original research lived, in the PTSD land. So all of those things that we do that seem to be useful for people, CBT and EMDR, exposure therapy, all of those things have some component of retelling that story. And so for some reason, it is important for us to process trauma through story. So I wanted to make sure that we captured that. And then what we'll do here is, so we've got the items that I pulled from other parts of literature and studies, and then the important part here that modifies this in a moral injury context is to think about what this means in terms of spiritual care. Okay, so when we are re-examining, what we're doing is working our way through a grieving process. And if there's anything that chaplains are probably the SMEs on in an organization, it is death and dying. That grief category has always been where we've lived, because those items are, they're so morally complex that this is why we spent 16 hours in systematic theology, so that we can understand good and evil and why why death and why all these things happen to why bad things happen to good people. So this grieving process that occurs, what we're looking to do is help people walk through what has been a traumatic event in their life, and now they must enter into a process of figuring out what to do with it, and what parts to keep and what parts to let go over the course of time. And ultimately what they're doing is they're searching for truth. They're putting themselves as a character in this story, and they're deciding, this is important. This is an important detail that is meaningful to my story. I am uncovering what all of these things mean and trying to wrap my brain around what actually did happen and how I was a part in that story. And they're looking to judge culpability. Did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? Did another human being that was there, did they do the right thing? Did they do the wrong thing? They are looking to determine who is right and who is wrong in this attempt to reassemble their moral framework. So, right, if you remember, I gave the transgress analogy. So they found themselves on the other side of the line, and now they're trying to reconcile with that line. And they're trying to say, am I a good guy still on the right side of the line, or am I a bad guy on the wrong side of the line? And figuring out all of those items. And then ultimately, in the larger spiritual process, this is a soul journey. This is something that their soul is working its way through, that is not only a narrative that exists from this particular traumatic event, but is a narrative that exists over the course of their entire life, where they are deciding what role they play in the greater sense of humanity, and whether or not they're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing with their larger meaning, purpose, and context. All right, so the next quadrant is reframe. And this is to consider, actually, let me go back for just a second. Chaplain Stewart mentioned this. If I can get a group of veterans doing this together rather than just me and the other person, that is everything, right? And you would think that that's difficult, but it just happens so automatically and so easily. And it amazes me. I always worry that somebody's going to be super judgmental about another person. And every once in a while you'll have somebody that you've got to kind of like put them back in line. But with just a little bit of work, you can create a cohesive, bonding group of individuals who will just take care of each other. We'll get to some more of that here in a minute. But just notice, it's in my model at least, it's figuring out how to talk about your deployment with trusted friends. That trusted piece is important there as well, right? You want somebody that's going to hold and honor the information you're giving them. All right, so moving to reframing. And so reframing, obviously, lots of psychological components in there. But what we're doing is considering the story from different angles. We're reinterpreting. Perhaps we might be able to find places where there is a more positive outlook in which we can see the circumstances as we begin to collect data and facts about circumstances and about what happened at that moment. In a lot of ways, we might be able to reframe those things in a very positive way where we may have started with a very negative aspect of thinking how things went down. Growth, even in the most difficult of circumstances, and I'll talk about the post-traumatic growth index here a little bit later, but all of you who are familiar with PTG, what we are saying to people in my model is that just because a traumatic event happened doesn't mean that you are broken, or if you feel like you are broken, it doesn't mean that you have to stay broken. That this is a moment in your life. This thing happened. Where do you go from here? And so part of this reframing is helping people find growth and opportunities out of even the most difficult of circumstances. The fog of war is an important aspect here. When we are retelling our story, and especially we can do it with a group of trusted friends, they may help clarify a lot of details that we just got wrong. They may be able to say, hey, don't forget, this happened right before that. And that may actually change your narrative about how you feel about your actions in the moment. And you might be able to, oh, yeah, I forgot. And now you can reintegrate that additional piece into your story. We're poor interpreters, especially in high-stakes circumstances. And then also group processing, right? So we are looking from that insight from other people to challenge our assumptions. We are always making assumptions about so many things in life. And you all know, right? Yet that first assumption is so often wrong. Once we collect more data, we have an opportunity to make to draw better conclusions from things that have happened to us. So here's the spiritual care components here. The religious community is pretty big into the idea of confession. That's one of the hallmarks, is that we have this way of reestablishing you as a righteous person in your community, and as a righteous person in a relationship to a higher power. That's a big part of what we do, right? That's why people come to church on Sunday morning. That's why people get involved in these religious communities, is they're looking to reframe, and there's that confessional aspect of the work that we do. And so we talked earlier about the engaging of a benevolent moral authority. I put the chair up here, right? And so you've got this benevolent moral authority who has the power, essentially, to say what you did was not wrong. Or to say, yes, what you did seems like it was wrong, but what do you do about it now? Can you forgive yourself for this? Can you accept this as part of your narrative and learn and grow from that? Compassion, as we are looking in the spiritual care framework here, we want people to receive that care and love of others in their communities. We are looking for those other veterans who are sitting around the circle with these folks to love them and to care for them. And we are looking to impart into their world that understanding that if they have a faith background and a belief, when we ask questions like, well, where do you see God in all this? Do you think that that's something too big for God to forgive? Like, you can ask these questions that allow them to receive that care and compassion from their community and from the higher power. And then, of course, the role of suffering. That was like eight hours of those 16-hour courses in theology, was what do we do with the role of suffering? Why do people suffer? Is that an important aspect of the world? Do you know people who have escaped suffering, or do we all suffer? And then what do you do after suffering has occurred? How do you grow from that? How do you move on from that? Is that a universal feature, or is that something that's happening uniquely to you? Of course, we know that it's a universal feature, right? And so to help people reframe in those worlds. And then ritual is such an incredibly interesting piece of this moral injury recovery. As I begin to look, and you would think that ritual is confined inside of the religious and spiritual spectrum. But actually, as we begin to look around, we find ritual in all sorts of places. And the thing that's interesting about rituals is that they make absolutely no sense. It is illogical. It is the opposite of battle. When your commander tells you to go out and put ordnance on spot X, the expectation is that your actions will directly impact that thing and make something happen there. But in ritual, we are actually doing actions that have no real impact on the physical world. You know, if a buddy of ours dies in combat, I cannot do enough memorial services to get that guy back. But we do those things anyway because they help us frame and they help us ground and understand. And so we see over and over again that these repetitive, ordered steps with no practical outcome, for some reason, tend to soothe the soul. There was a study, Zong and Liljenquist, they actually had, and their ethicists, they had their participants recall for them an unethical deed that they had done in their life. So a true story that they had done that they felt was unethical. And then at the conclusion of their interaction with them, they set up this poor grad student to ask for money to help fund further research. And they made a real sad, sappy story that they were trying to get to play on these people's heartstrings, essentially. You've just told us something bad about what you have done in life. Don't you now want to contribute to XYZ because it will help all these other people, right? And so they just ran that. That was the control group. In the other group, what they did is they gave people the alcohol rub. You know, what's the word I'm looking for here? Hand sanitizer. They gave people hand sanitizer. And then they asked them for money. Like, the rates plummeted. Some reason this cleansing event helped that person's soul feel clean in a way that they couldn't be manipulated by the poor grad student afterwards. What sense does that make? It doesn't. We engage in things all the time to self-soothe that really don't have an impact. That did not cleanse their moral deed. They just cleansed themselves. And as we talk about integrative care, wow, someone using hand sanitizer cleansed their soul somehow. So anyway, put out bottles everywhere, I guess, is the answer to that study. But it was insane. It reduced those feelings of guilt. Another item here is that rituals always have, or tend to have, some sort of generational impact. I'll get you a second here. Rituals tend to have some sort of generational impact. And so what we're actually doing is we're passing information from those who are wise or sage or have been around for a bit of time down to younger generations to help them interpret how things should go and what things should look like. And so you think about a memorial service, when a chaplain conducts a memorial service, who are the speakers usually? Who? Friends. We got friends and family. We got people that are really close that have known them for a long time, right? Who else? Colleagues. Yeah, so maybe a supervisor or something, right? We've got people who who are telling us how we should feel as friends. Who else? The commander, right? So the commander is usually a person that speaks. Why do we have the commander speak? There's some authority that lives there. There's something about, I've been around the block a long time. I've probably seen something like this before. I can't tell you how many times commanders do memorial services for people that they have never met. The other person that speaks is the chaplain, and we usually close those services, right? And so we are attempting, and we're all old folks, we all start at like 35 years of age, so we're attempting to pass on some generational wisdom about how we handle death and dying, because we've seen it before, and we understand some of the things that you might be going through here in the future. So this ritualized aspect is so important as we think about how we help people recover from moral injuries. And on the psychological side, we start to see, I'm seeing the research in ritualization just continue to grow, all the way from folks trying to fix their golf swings to grief resolution, and just so many other things in terms of how do we engage ritual and why is that good and helpful for us. So, okay, as we think about rituals in terms of a spirituality sense, number one, your religious organizations that exist around, we've got kind of a rich and ancient history of rituals. We've been doing rituals for a little bit, and so many of our rituals already account for a lot of the things that you might find in moral injury, right? So if you find someone who feels like they need to confess something, we might have a ritual for that. If you feel like someone might need to be cleansed of something, we've got a ritual for that. There are a bunch of, yeah, go ahead, what do you think? It's been validated by thousands of years of research.
Is it evidence-based?
It's probably evidence. I don't know. So, yes, we've been doing this for a small slice of time. So if you need help creating a ritual, and actually I'll say that down here at the we'll just drop down the last one. But if you need help creating a ritual of sorts for a particular event where you don't, like, how beautiful is that? Right? How important is that? And does it fix anything? No. But does it make you feel grounded and like you belong to these people? Yeah. Do you think they do that for you? Yes. Does that make you want to work with them and get over your own stuff to be in community with them? Of course. Yeah. So if you need help designing a ritual, might I suggest your friendly local chaplain may have some ideas on things that you might be able to do to ritualize. All right. So another item is that these rituals happen in community. They are communal by their nature. We don't tend to do rituals alone very much. There are some individual rituals, but the most powerful ones happen in community. And again, right, they are saying to each other, we care about each other. Right? Why do I put on my dress blues and go and do the funeral of a veteran who I have never met and whose family I have never met? Why do we send an honor guard out to do that? Because we are saying communally, we care about you. And if you ever sit and talk to those honor guard folks after they've done a couple rotations, most of them are changed individuals because they have really done something that is important. And in their minds, they have now cemented that not only did I do this for this fellow veteran, but one day someone is going to be doing this at my grave, and I have that kind of importance to this organization. It's really meaningful. And then we're bringing form to the formless, right? So how do you... In a physical sense, you can purify your hands from germs, but how do you purify your soul? Right? That's not something that's tangible. And so we use these rituals that are off to the side a little bit to get at those ideas of purification and sanctification, of confession and of forgiveness, and of all of these spiritual aspects that are not something that you can tangibly impact, but they are something that you can ritualize and enter into this space where by doing something that has been done for thousands of years, somehow we enter into this space where things are made right and whole and good again. And then my final piece of the model here is called Reconnect, and that's where we purposefully engage people with their community. Now, almost every bit of research says that social support buffers against like everything. If you name a malady in life, there's probably like 55 studies that says if we get you in a caring, kind group of community that will love on you, your chances of doing whatever probably go away, or at least diminish greatly. So what we want to do for folks who, especially after they've returned from a deployment, is figure out a way for them to reconnect and re-engage in community. All right, there's some intentionality that's going to be required on the part of the member for this. Because obviously we may have them in a group where we're doing this intervention, and then what's going to happen is they're going to leave from there, and they're going to go somewhere else, and it's going to require some input investment from them. Truth of the matter is, it is very hard to go be a part of a community. It is not easy to walk in the door of someone who is already well-established social bonds and to be the new person that just shows up one day. You don't know whether or not you're even going to like the community. So how do you go invest in these things? And so we've got to help folks find that intentionality. And another thing is that their efforts to do this is constantly severed, right? So if you think about especially military folks, you finally find that running club, and you finally got, you're in shape, and you're killing that PT test, and everything's fantastic, and you're really happy about where you are. And then, oh, by the way, we're deploying you, and now we're feeding you defect food, and you can't run outside because it's smoggy and hazy and everything else, and you end up just having your efforts severed to be in community. Now, luckily with the deployment, there's another community that hopefully you can join on to. But what about when you then come home from that deployment, right? Now I've built all these fantastic relationships with all these human beings, and if it's anything like a bunch of the deployments I went on, like then the people I ate dinner with, one went to Washington State, one went to Cannon, one went to Herbie, one went to Fort Bragg, and then we were just, our community was just completely severed. But yet we'd had this event together where we spent time and we learned to care about each other, and somehow just because of the military life that we engage in, our efforts to stay in community were severed. And I would like to think that we do a good job of communicating with each other, but that just means that once every year or so we send each other a text message or a funny picture or something. That's not really probably the community that we're looking for people to build. And and this happens too in terms of PCSs, right? You finally find that church group that you are just, this is it. I love these people, they love me. And now, okay, orders drop, you're going somewhere completely different. You have to pack up and leave those people. All of our folks end up in severed community the moment they walk into basic training, because every social support structure they have is in their hometown. And I don't think there's probably very many people who join from any particular area that get resent back to their hometown after basic training. That just does not happen. And so social support now has this exceptional proximity from where you came from and those other folks. And then all those basic trainees that you were with, they do the exact same thing. They go here, there, and everywhere. And so now you've lost your first sense of community. So it's constantly getting severed in a military environment. And then there's also this learning curve that's associated. We like to think in so many aspects of life that intuitively people will just go out and become part of a community. And I just don't think that that's accurate. I think people may desire that. I think they may want that. But I don't think most of us are very good at just going and having awkward conversations with people that we do not know. Think about the model of suicidality. Somebody help me here. Joyner, thank you. If you think about Joyner's model of suicidality, because now I'm off script, so sorry, you get what you get. No, this is great. If you think about Joyner's model of suicidality, right, he talks about belongingness and burdensomeness. And he says that if you have thwarted belongingness, if you have belonged, but now that's been thwarted for one reason or another, and then if you feel like a burden, that those are the places where we really have to look out for people in terms of whether or not we think they may be at risk for suicide. Okay, so when we think about belongingness and we look at the suicide research, there was a point in time when being a military member was a protective factor in whether or not you would commit suicide. Right? If you put your hand in the air and you join the Air Force or the Navy or the Marines or the Army, like you were now somehow more protected and less likely to commit suicide. But then it was like 2012, right? The numbers started to cross. And now we are in the opposite circumstance where if you join the military, you are more likely to commit suicide. And so as I think back and I listen to my grandfather retired out of Eglin in like the 70s, and I would listen to, and until his dying day, he shopped at the commissary. I have only been at the commissary on accident. You know, they went to the movie theater, they stood at the beginning and the Star Spangled Banner played, and then they went to chapel.
You couldn't even get into a club on a Friday night.
The club!
You couldn't even get into one.
They forced me to go to a club at Maxwell, and I don't think I've been back to one since, right? Like, I mean, these things that we used to do, we were all part of this community that existed. And now I think it's probably different here. But at Hurlburt, for instance, Tom, at 4:27 p.m., maybe a little earlier if you can figure it out, you are beating feet for wherever home is. And you do not come back. Yeah, you do not come back to that base. You would not come back on the weekend. You would not come back in the evening. You would not come back to go to the commissary. No, that's insanity. Why would anybody want to do that? But did we lose all those protective factors of social support when we did that? And some of that's societal, like some of that we're not going to fix. So in some ways, we're just going to have to figure out how to rebuild social support. And that takes some real intentionality from commanders who, just because they can fly an airplane doesn't mean that they know how to create a good socially cohesive squadron. That's really where it comes into play in terms of leadership. Can your leadership create a cohesive culture where people feel like they're wanted and want to be part of that team? And in places where, you know, and so I'll have people every once in a while go, Cannon's not so bad. You know, like they tell you it as if it's a secret, right? But I think when you hear people say that, it's because of exactly what you talked about. It's because it's almost more like an overseas location because you are isolated and you depend upon each other. And that is exactly what I'm talking about with Reconnect, right? We are trying to figure out how to roll people back in to those natural resources that exist on their left and their right. Because we cannot hire enough POTIF providers to take care of every human being on this base. No, we just can't.
It was a culture. Literally and figuratively. It was a culture.
Yeah, it's a culture.
It's a culture. And if I may, and I apologize if I talk too much, but I've been around since forever. But back in those days, in the 80s and 90s, if you ever asked anybody what your best experience was about Cannon, Griffiths, wherever, it always was the people.
That's right.
Always.
That's right.
I don't know if we hear that today as much. I don't know.
It happens, but I will tell you it is leader motivated, almost squadron level leader motivated, because you can have the worst leadership at Hurlburt and have a terrible time, and have the best leadership at Cannon, and in that location, it's not location dependent, right? It really is that leadership and that culture that is built, and this reconnect part of this is so very important when our people come back from a deployment, in a lot of ways, because they now do have experiences that even maybe people in their own shop don't have, and they may not feel comfortable. And they did there's some traumatic pieces to just losing that group of friends that you now have learned to depend on for the last 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, whatever. And now you've come back to strangers. Maybe there's a new person that works next door. Maybe they moved your office while you were gone. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like you were coming back and all of a sudden you're like the new kid again. You're like, how did I do this? Like, no, I live here, right? You know, but that happens. And so we have to help people when they come back from something like that, or when they PCS or wherever else. We've got to help them immediately try to figure out how they can do that difficult work of re-entering into community. All right, so when we think about the spiritual care concepts of community, there it is. Nope, there it went. Okay, so again, perhaps validated by approximately 2,000 years worth of data. Houses of worship are probably the largest community organizations in your town. We in the religious and spiritual world have community as one of our foundational aspects. And in fact, the data is so confusing when we start looking at religion and spirituality, as we try to tease out the data in terms of, is this religion and spirituality that is helping you do X, Y, Z or not do X, Y, Z? When we try to control for community, it's like impossible. It is almost impossible to tease out those individual pieces. In my opinion, what happens is they magnify each other. And so when you add the spiritual component to the community component, you see this kind of interlocking, and it's just goodness added onto goodness as long as it's good. And if it's not good, then it's just badness upon badness, because now you've lost your community and you've lost your faith. And so really making sure that people are engaged in healthy communities, and if you can find good, healthy spiritual communities for people to be involved in, makes a big difference. There's also platforms for education there. So, I think a lot about, at a bunch of the churches that I went to, they were, or churches that were around bases where I've been stationed, they are all desperately looking for like 18 to 24-year-olds. Because churches tend to gray and be a bit older over time, and they are constantly trying to figure out how do we attract these millennials? How do we figure out how to engage
Twitter.
people? What's that?
Twitter. Sorry.
Twitter?
Yeah, get them out there.
You got to get on the Instagrams and on the anyway. Y'all can see my TikTok channel later.
That's what they need to do.
This. But what happens there is because you've got these people who have lived life. I think about all of those Vietnam veterans that were suffering silently, that opened up to me at a hospital, that could have done all of my troops some real good. And so I think that a spiritual community is a place where you can build those kind of mentoring relationships, and you can go find people in the community that can help you in the challenging parts of life. In addition to what Chaplain Stewart said about our folks, forming that understanding of morality and good and evil, think about all the life changes that happen to people in the age demographic that we're talking to. They leave home for the first time. They may get married. They may get divorced. They may have children. This is real life change stuff. And again, I say the same thing when we go do marriage retreats. Like, we think that people are just supposed to know how to be married. And I'll ask some of our pilots, like, how many hours did it take you to learn to fly that C-130? And you think that you're going to learn how to be married because you stood in front of a pastor and you said, I do? Like, you thought that was the education required for that? And I'm glad there's no spouses in the room, because nobody gets to elbow anybody, right? But why do we think that? Why do we think that relationships just work? Why do we think that people can just come back and integrate in community? Why do we think that people should know how to deal with the deepest, darkest parts of their soul all by themselves? It's silliness. It's silliness. And so your spiritual community, hopefully can be useful to you in terms of providing people who are mentors. And then also we can reflect the life and experiences of this base out to those communities. I'm sure you guys probably have some sort of clergy days here that happen where they bring the local clergy in from the outside, and they talk to them about what it means to be on this base and to do this job, and how those clergy might be able to take care of folks as they come entering their spaces. All right, here's another item that I've noticed in terms of spiritual community. There seems to be some durability that's associated with it. If I have a relationship with another human being that also has a spiritual component, I seem to be more likely to keep in touch with that person over the course of time. There is just something about that connection that you made that is not just between the two of you, but that is also somehow transcendent, that it just drives that desire to keep that relationship longer, and it just tends to be something that you can kind of take with you. And so even though we are popping people from place to place to place, I do find the people that I've had spiritual connections with over the course of time are the people that, at least in my life, keep popping up again and again and again. And so maybe that's just Doug, but I think that there's something to that there's some durability that is associated when you begin to mix not only just community, but spiritual community. Okay, So here's the framework. We've walked all the way around it. This may be the only thing I have to offer to the world, so please be impressed. This is a lot of work. This is a 250-page book, and it came down to four arrows. Okay, so re-examine, talk about your deployments with trusted friends, reframe, consider your story from different angles, ritualize, explore the deeper meaning and commemorate, and reconnect to purposefully engage in your community. Okay, so based on that model, what we're going to transition to here in a few minutes is an intervention that I built on this model using these concepts and these frameworks. And we're going to do it interactively. So I'm going to have some of you come up and be guinea pigs for me. And we're going to talk through some things. And we'll just see how it goes. We'll just see how it goes. I do this on a regular basis with my airmen. And so I'm pretty comfortable in that context, but y'all are a whole new kettle of fish here. So we're going to see how it goes. But I'm excited to share this model, this intervention that I use. And then, after we get done with that, I'm going to empower you with some tools, and you're going to build your own intervention. And you're going to think about, how do we get people around this model? How do we help people at different locations and different places re-examine and then reframe and ritualize or reconnect? Or how do we just do one of those? How do we help people ritualize? How do we help people reconnect? If you're in the social domain, that might be where you focus. And just figure out, grab one or two or three of these and figure out a place where you can go back to whatever squadron you're assigned to and have a tool built at the end of today that, will need some tweaking or whatever, but have something built at the end of today that you might be able to go and take this and turn it from a bunch of circle arrows into something that is meaningful in your context and in your community.